The living room was quiet. Sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, casting warm light on the old furniture. Family photos lined the walls. Wedding pictures, childhood memories, birthdays, and holidays that felt like they happened just yesterday. The house, though worn, held so much history. It was my home, my sanctuary. I had spent so many years making it a place of love and comfort for my family, pouring my heart into every corner, every meal, and every small detail. I remember when we first moved in. It was a modest home, just enough for the two of us, my husband and me. Over the years, as our children arrived, we made it our own. I painted walls, fixed leaks, planted flowers in the garden, and decorated for every holiday with care. It wasn't a mansion, but it was ours, and it was full of love. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being enough. The day my children came over, I didn't expect what would come next. They arrived, distracted, absorbed in their own lives. I greeted them with a smile, but as they walked through the house, I heard words that stopped me in my tracks. "It's outdated," one of them said as they glanced around. "It's ugly," the other added. My heart sank. The house that had been a home to them, the place I had put so much of myself into, was now dismissed as nothing more than a relic of the past. I stood there, trying to hold it together. The house I had built for them, the one I had poured my heart into, suddenly felt irrelevant. They were talking about the place where they had grown up, where I had stayed up late comforting them, the place that held all their first memories. And yet, it wasn't enough anymore. I wasn't enough. I didn't argue. I didn't fight back. I just stood there, silently absorbing the sting of their words. They didn't even realize how much it hurt. The house wasn't just walls and a roof to me. It was everything. It was a part of my soul. And to hear them call it ugly, to hear them dismiss everything I had sacrificed for them, it broke something inside me. But I didn't say anything. I just watched them walk around, indifferent to the place I had loved, the place that had been my life. They didn't see it. They didn't see me. For so many years, I had sacrificed everything for them. My dreams, my time, my energy. I made sure they had everything I didn't, everything I couldn't afford. I worked hard, late into the night, to make sure their lives were better. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I became invisible, a shadow in my own life. I thought that if I gave them everything, they would see me. But they didn't. They just saw an outdated house. I walked through the rooms, touching the walls, as if by doing so I could hold onto the memories. The photos on the walls, the family meals, the birthdays celebrated. All the love that had been poured into this place. But it no longer mattered to them. It wasn't enough. And I wasn't enough. I thought about it. Thought about everything I had done. Everything I had given up. And it hit me. I had spent so many years living for everyone else, putting everyone else's needs before mine. I gave and gave until there was nothing left of me. And now it was time to stop. It was time to live for myself. To stop seeking approval from people who would never truly see me. To stop giving everything and expecting nothing in return. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything was about to change. I decided to sell the house that had been my everything, the house that had seen so many memories, so much love, and so many sacrifices. I was going to buy my dream house, a place just for me, a place that reflected who I was now, not who I used to be. It was time to make a new start, to take control of my life, and stop letting others define my worth. That decision wasn't easy. It wasn't just about leaving a house behind. It was about leaving behind a version of myself I had outgrown. It was about saying goodbye to the woman who had spent so many years in the background, waiting for recognition, waiting for love. It was time to step into the light. I picked up the phone and made the call. The house was sold, and with the money from the sale, I was going to buy something for myself. A dream house. It was going to be mine. All mine. No one else's. I walked out of the old house for the last time. I closed the door behind me and stepped into a new chapter of my life. The past was behind me. The future was mine to create. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to live for me. The days after I sold the house were strangely quiet. I had packed up a lifetime of memories and handed them over to someone else. The house, now in someone else's hands, no longer held the weight of my life in it. I felt a mix of sadness and liberation, a strange quietness settling in my chest. I hadn't realized how much I had been living in the shadows of my own family, how much of myself I had given up to make everyone else happy. As the weeks passed, I began to notice the emptiness around me more and more. I found myself in a new space, but something was still missing. I had my own house now, a beautiful space that was mine to shape, to decorate, to make my own. Yet, despite all that, a familiar ache lingered. I had spent so many years living for others, seeking their approval, their love. I realized I didn't know how to live for myself, not fully, not yet. I tried to settle into my new home. The furniture felt unfamiliar, and the walls, though painted in colors I loved, seemed too quiet. I walked through each room, rearranging things, but somehow it didn't feel like home. It was too big, too empty, like I was trying to fill a space that could never be filled by objects alone. I wasn't just looking for a house. I was looking for myself. My children didn't call much. The weeks passed, and the silence between us grew. I had hoped for a visit, maybe an apology, perhaps a recognition of everything I had done for them. Maybe they would see how much I had sacrificed and how hard I had worked. But nothing came. I began to wonder if they even noticed that I was gone, if they realized that I had stepped away from the life I had built for them. It wasn't just that they didn't see the house for what it was that they didn't see me for who I was. My sacrifices, my love, my efforts, it had all become invisible to them. I felt like I had spent years pouring myself into them, into their lives, into making them happy, and yet, when I needed to be seen, when I needed recognition, I was met with silence. They weren't just ignoring the house. They were ignoring me. The loneliness began to settle in like a thick fog. I had always been the one to call, the one to make sure everything was okay, the one who kept the family together. But now, it seemed like I was the one forgotten. My phone sat silent on the counter, and the house, despite its beauty, felt like an empty shell. There were moments when I would sit in my new living room, the one that was supposed to be my sanctuary, and wonder if I had made the right choice. Was I wrong to let go of the life I had known? Was I wrong to leave the house behind? Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just being selfish, but deep down I knew I wasn't wrong. I had done everything for them. I had given up so much. And for what? So that they could forget me, so they could treat me like an afterthought? I realized that the time had come to stop looking for validation from them. I needed to validate myself. I spent long hours sitting by the window, staring out at the world, thinking. I began to remember parts of myself that I had forgotten. I remembered the woman I used to be before I became a mother, before I became a wife. I remembered the dreams I had put on hold, the things I had sacrificed for the sake of others. I started to remember who I was before I lost myself in everyone else's needs. One evening, as I was sitting on the back porch of my new home, I heard the familiar sound of a text message coming through. My heart skipped a beat, hoping it was one of my children reaching out. I picked up my phone, and it was a message from my daughter. She said, "Mom, we've been meaning to come by. Sorry we haven't. Life's just been so busy." That was it. No mention of the house, no apology for the way I had been treated. Just an acknowledgement of the busyness of her life. I stared at the screen for a long time. The words on the screen felt hollow, as though they had been written without any real thought or feeling behind them. It was the same tone I had gotten for years. Life's just busy. Busy with what? Busy with their lives, while I had been busy losing myself in their shadows. I sat there, feeling the ache in my chest grow heavier. I thought about everything I had done for them. The late nights, the long hours, the sacrifices, the love. And yet, here I was in a new home, surrounded by silence, waiting for a call, waiting for a visit that would never come. And I realized something in that moment. I couldn't keep waiting. I couldn't keep living for them, hoping they would finally see me, hoping they would finally acknowledge what I had done. I had to stop looking for validation from them. I had to stop living for them. It was time to start living for me. I didn't pick up the phone and respond to the message. Instead, I put the phone down and walked outside. The air was cool, the night sky clear and vast. I stood there for a moment, taking in the stillness, the quiet. And in that silence, I realized that I had finally started to hear myself. I wasn't just the woman who had raised them, who had sacrificed everything for them. I wasn't just the invisible mother, the one who gave and never asked for anything in return. I was more than that. I was a woman who deserved to be seen, to be heard, and to live a life that was truly mine. I had bought my dream house. I had built a new life for myself, and I was going to make sure it was a life worth living. The silence was becoming unbearable. My new house, despite being beautiful, felt colder than I had imagined. Every room I entered, every space I tried to make my own, felt empty, not because of the furniture or the decor, but because I was still carrying the weight of my old life with me. I was still living in the shadow of the woman I had been, the mother, the giver, the one who always put others first. And it was time to change that. Weeks had passed since the last message from my daughter, and though I told myself that I was no longer waiting for their approval, it still stung every time my phone remained silent. Every time I would see families, mothers and daughters, sharing moments on social media, I couldn't help but wonder what went wrong with us. Why was I still trying so hard to make them see me, to make them love me? It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. But more than that, it wasn't healthy. One afternoon, as I sat sipping tea by the window, I thought about the life I had built around them, the sacrifices, the love, the way I had lost myself in their needs. I thought about how much I had given, financially, emotionally, physically, and yet nothing had been enough. My house had been dismissed. My role as a mother had been minimized, and in the end, I had been left standing alone in the ruins of everything I thought mattered. It wasn't just the house that was outdated, it was me. And I realized it was time to stop living in the past. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that their indifference didn't bother me. I had spent so many years thinking my worth was tied to what I did for them. But now, I understood that my value came from within. I had to make the choice to step into a new life, a life that was not dependent on their love or their approval. It was time to let go of the weight I had been carrying and take control of my own future. That night, after a long day of reflection, I sat down at my desk. The quiet in the house was deafening. I pulled out the papers I had been keeping in a drawer for months, the documents related to the sale of my old house, the new house I had bought, and the college fund I had been saving for my granddaughter. I had been saving for years, putting away every little bit of money I could, birthday money, extra cash from art commissions, even skipping meals to make sure I had enough to send Madison to school. The plan had always been simple. Save enough so she could go to college without worrying about finances. But now, looking at those papers, something inside me shifted. Madison, the little girl I had raised as my own, had barely spoken to me in recent months. I had poured so much of my life into her, thinking she would appreciate it. But the distance between us had only grown. And now, with her not even acknowledging my sacrifices, I realized something. It was time to stop. I picked up the phone and dialed the bank. It wasn't easy. It wasn't a decision made in anger, but rather in quiet determination. The person on the other end asked me if I was sure about the transfer. I paused for a moment, letting the reality of the decision wash over me. But I didn't hesitate. I was sure. I wasn't going to keep giving away pieces of myself to people who didn't value me. The transfer was simple. The money I had saved for Madison's future was now transferred into my own account. It wasn't out of spite or malice. It was a step toward reclaiming my power. For the first time in years, I was choosing myself. The silence in my house felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was calm. It was mine. I didn't tell anyone. Not my daughter. Not Madison. Not anyone. I didn't need to justify my decision to them anymore. It was my life, my money, and my future. I wasn't going to keep sacrificing for people who didn't even see me. The next morning, I sat in the kitchen, the cup of tea I had poured still sitting untouched in front of me. I felt something in my chest, a quiet, peaceful kind of certainty. I wasn't angry. I wasn't upset. I wasn't filled with regret. I simply felt like I had finally made a choice that was mine. As the days passed, I began to adjust to this new reality. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The house was still quiet, but it didn't feel like a void anymore. It felt like a place where I could finally be myself. I began to fill the space with things that made me happy, not things that would impress anyone, but things that brought me peace. I bought new furniture, new art for the walls. I decorated with things that made me feel seen, things that were for me, not for anyone else. And as the weeks went on, I began to realize something else. I wasn't just building a new home. I was building a new version of myself, a version that didn't need to apologize for her choices, a version that didn't need to make others happy at her own expense, a version that was strong enough to say no and take control of her own happiness. But as I started to rebuild, I also began to feel the weight of one question. What would they say when they found out? What would Madison say? Would she be angry? Would my daughter be hurt? I knew I had made the right choice, but the thought of their reaction still lingered. It was then that I realized something else. I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. I was living for me. If they didn't understand, that was their choice. If they didn't see the sacrifices I had made, that was their loss. But I was done pretending to be invisible. I was done living in the shadows. And with that realization, something inside me clicked. I was free. As the weeks passed, I began to settle into my new life. The house, my dream house, was everything I had hoped for, and yet it felt like I was only beginning to scratch the surface of what I truly needed. There were still moments of loneliness, still times when I would sit in silence, wondering what I had really done. But those moments were fewer now, and when they came, I took them for what they were, just passing thoughts, fleeting moments of doubt that would soon be replaced with a stronger, clearer sense of self. I had chosen this house carefully, not because it was the biggest or the most luxurious, but because it felt like mine. Every room, every corner was a reflection of who I was now, not who I had been as a wife and mother, but as a woman reclaiming her life, her worth, and her dreams. I had chosen colors that made me feel calm, furniture that made me feel comfortable, and artwork that told the story of my journey. There were no expectations here, no one else's opinions to weigh on me. This house was built for me and only me. It wasn't just about the physical space. It was about the space I was carving out for myself in the world. I had spent so many years making space for others, and now it was time to make space for me. The walls, though bare at first, slowly began to fill with memories I was creating for myself, small moments of joy that were mine alone. I woke up every morning to the sound of birds chirping outside my window, the sunlight spilling across my hardwood floors. The quiet was beautiful. It was my time to breathe, to reflect, and to let go of the burdens of the past. I had spent so many years feeling like I was never enough, like I had to prove myself to others. But here, in my new home, I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I began spending my days doing things that brought me joy, things I had long forgotten, things I had pushed aside because they didn't fit into the mold of who I thought I was supposed to be. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in years. It was something I had always loved, but never made time for. My brushes were old, the paints dried up in places. But when I sat down with them in my new studio space, it was like stepping into another world. The feeling of a paintbrush in my hand, the way the colors came to life on the canvas, it was freeing. It wasn't about creating something that others would like or admire. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about expressing myself, giving voice to the emotions and thoughts I had kept buried for so long. I wasn't painting for approval. I was painting for me. At first, the paintings were simple, almost abstract. I didn't know what I was trying to create, but that didn't matter. The process itself was what mattered. It was the first time in years that I had given myself permission to simply exist, to do something without the expectation that it had to lead to something else. There was no rush, no agenda, just me, my paints, and the quiet space around me. I also spent time walking around my neighborhood. I had never truly explored the area before. In my old life, I had been too busy with the kids, with the house, with the endless list of things to do. But now there was time to slow down, Time to appreciate the beauty around me that I had once overlooked. The streets were lined with old trees, their leaves swaying gently in the breeze. The houses were charming, each one different from the next. I began to appreciate the small details, the flowers in the garden, the smell of fresh-cut grass, the laughter of children playing in the distance. It was during one of these walks that I met her. Her name was Helen, and she was an artist who lived a few streets over. I had seen her out walking her dog several times, but this time she stopped to talk. She told me she was new to the area and had just opened an art gallery downtown. I had been hesitant at first, unsure of whether or not I was ready to open myself up to someone new. But something about her energy, her kindness, made me feel comfortable. We began talking about art, about life, and soon she invited me to visit her gallery. I wasn't sure if I was ready for that, but something inside me told me to go. So the next day I did. When I walked into her gallery, it felt like stepping into another world. The space was open, airy, and filled with paintings and sculptures that seemed to tell stories all on their own. Helen showed me around, explaining each piece, telling me the stories behind them. As we walked through the gallery, I realized that I had been so focused on the past, on everything I had lost, that I hadn't taken the time to look forward. Helen's gallery was a place of possibility. It was a place where people came to express themselves, to share their stories, to be seen. As we talked, she invited me to display some of my own work. I was taken aback. I hadn't even considered showing my paintings to anyone other than myself. But she encouraged me, telling me that art was meant to be shared, that the world needed to see what I had to offer. I hesitated at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt right. Maybe it was time for me to let go of my fears, to stop hiding behind the walls I had built. Maybe it was time to let others see me, to show them who I really was. So I agreed. Over the next few weeks, I carefully selected a few of my pieces to display at Helen's gallery. When the day came for the opening, I was nervous. What if no one liked my work? What if I embarrassed myself? But as soon as I walked into the gallery that night and saw my paintings hanging on the walls, I felt a rush of pride. People were looking at my work. They were admiring it. They were seeing me. Helen was right. I wasn't just painting for me anymore. I was painting for the world. And in that moment, I realized that I had spent so many years living in the background, waiting for someone to notice me, that I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. But now I was seen, and it felt incredible. The opening was a success. People came, they asked questions about my paintings, and they even bought a few. It wasn't about the money, it was about the recognition. It was about finally stepping into my power, finally showing the world who I was and what I could do. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living in alignment with who I truly was. The weeks that followed were filled with more moments of joy, more time spent painting, more walks through the neighborhood, and more moments of quiet reflection. I was finally at peace with who I was. I was no longer just the woman who gave everything for her family. I was more than that. I was a woman who had lived for herself, who had reclaimed her life and her dreams. And then one day I received a call. It was Madison, my granddaughter. She had seen the pictures of my art show on social media. She was so proud of me. She told me she wanted to visit soon. I could hear the excitement in her voice, the warmth that I had missed for so long. For the first time in years, I felt like my family was coming back. But this time, it wasn't because I had done something for them. It was because I had done something for myself. I had found my voice, and in doing so, I had found my place in the world. I wasn't just a mother, a grandmother, a wife. I was me, and that was enough. I was no longer just the woman in the background, the invisible one who had spent her life sacrificing for others. I had become someone new, someone who painted, someone who was seen, and someone who was finally putting herself first. But just as I began to embrace this new life, I received a phone call that sent my world spinning. It was Lauren, my daughter. Her voice was sharp, laced with concern, and just a touch of anger. "Mom, I heard about the art show and the new house. Why didn't you tell me about any of this?" Her words felt like a slap in the face, not because of the concern, but because of the tone. The accusatory, almost disappointed way she spoke to me, as though I had done something wrong. Mom, this is all a little too much, don't you think? You can't just uproot your whole life like this and expect everyone to understand, she continued, her voice rising. We're your family, and we should be the ones you share this stuff with. It's not like you've been very involved with us lately. I took a deep breath. It hurt, more than I cared to admit, but I was no longer that woman who would just nod quietly and agree to keep the peace. I wasn't invisible anymore, and I wasn't going to let them walk all over me. Lauren, I said, my voice steady, I'm living for myself now. For the first time in years, I'm doing something that's just for me. I didn't need to ask for your permission or your approval. I've spent decades doing that, living my life for you, for the family. Now it's my turn. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, a little heavier now, as though the weight of my words was sinking in. But I didn't stop. I've given you everything, Lauren. Everything. My time, my energy, my love. And I loved you. I still do. But I can't keep giving to you when it's killing me inside. I've given enough. It's time for me to take care of myself. Her voice softened slightly, though there was still a hint of frustration. I understand that, Mom. But it feels like you're pushing us away. Like you've shut us out completely. I haven't shut you out, Lauren. I've just stopped living for you. I've stopped hiding behind what you want me to be. The words felt liberating, even as they cut through the air between us. I've spent so long trying to please everyone, thinking that was my role. I thought that was what being a good mother was. But I've learned that taking care of me isn't selfish. It's necessary. I could hear her sigh, the weight of our conversation pressing down on her. And then she said something that I wasn't expecting. I just don't know how to be around you when you're like this. You're not the same person anymore. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat growing. I'm still your mother, Lauren. I'm still the person who loves you and wants the best for you. But I'm not the same person. And that's okay. We both need to grow. I'm allowed to grow. We stayed silent for a moment. I could hear her shifting on the other end of the line, unsure of how to respond. Finally, she said quietly, I guess I'm just worried. I don't want to lose you, Mom. I closed my eyes, the words heavy in the air. You're not losing me, Lauren. But I'm not going to be the woman you think I should be anymore. I'm going to be me. And I'm going to take care of myself for once. There was another pause before she spoke again, more softly this time. I guess I can't stop you from doing what makes you happy. I don't know where this leaves us. I felt the sting of her words, but I also knew something had shifted. I wasn't asking for permission anymore. I wasn't apologizing for choosing myself. Where it leaves us is up to you, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I'm not going anywhere, Lauren. But I'm not going to be invisible anymore either. If you want to be a part of my life, you'll have to accept me for who I am now, not who I was. And if you can't do that, then I understand. But I'm still here. The conversation ended with a strained silence. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel peace. What I felt was something I hadn't felt in years, uncertainty. It was the realization that this wasn't just about me anymore. I had changed, yes, but it seemed like I had also shaken the foundation of the family I had built. And maybe that was the hardest part. But even as I hung up the phone, a sense of clarity began to settle in. I had made my decision. I was choosing me. If they couldn't see that, if they couldn't accept it, then that was their choice. I had spent too many years sacrificing for people who didn't truly see me. Now, it was time to step into the light. The following weeks were filled with more tense conversations, more strained moments. But with each passing day, I felt more confident in my decision. I wasn't going to let the fear of losing them dictate how I lived my life. I kept painting. I kept creating. And slowly, the people who appreciated me for who I had become started to come into my life. They were the ones who supported me, who saw the changes I was making as an evolution, not a betrayal. These were the people who wanted me to grow. They weren't afraid of the new me. They embraced it. But the hardest part was still to come. One evening, after a long day of painting, I received a text message from Madison. She hadn't called in months. She hadn't even visited. But her message was brief. Nana, can we talk? I miss you. Can I come by? For a moment, I was speechless. My heart began to race. It had been so long since she reached out. I hadn't heard those words in so long. I miss you. I didn't know if I was ready for this, for the guilt, the emotions, the questions that would come. But more than anything, I was ready for closure. I was ready for her to see me, not as the woman who had given everything for her, but as the woman who was living for herself. I took a deep breath and typed back, "Yes, Madison. Please come by." I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. This time, I wasn't going to apologize for who I had become. This time, I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. I was finally ready to face the consequences of choosing myself. The day Madison came by, I could feel the weight of everything building up inside me. I had been so focused on my own growth, so determined to stop being the invisible woman, that I hadn't realized how much I still needed closure, how much I needed to reconnect with the people I loved. But now, as I stood at the door waiting for her to arrive, I could feel the old doubts creeping in. Was I really ready for this? Would she understand? I stood by the door for what felt like forever, my hand resting on the doorknob, my mind racing through every possible scenario. What would she say? What would she think of me now? I couldn't help but wonder if my choice to focus on myself, to stop living for others, would cost me the relationship I had cherished most. Then the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Madison standing there, her eyes wide with a mix of uncertainty and longing. She was no longer the little girl who ran to me for comfort. She was a young adult, filled with her own dreams, her own life. But in that moment, I saw something familiar in her, something that reminded me of the connection we had shared in the past. She stepped inside, hesitating for a moment as she looked around. "It's really beautiful, Nana," she said softly, glancing around the room. "I've never seen a place that feels so peaceful." I smiled, but the weight of the moment made it hard to fully embrace it. "Thank you, sweetheart. I've worked hard to make it feel like home." Madison sat down on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was clearly nervous, and I could feel the tension between us. I sat across from her, trying to calm my racing heart. I had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, I wasn't sure what to say. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Nana, I'm sorry. I should have reached out sooner. I know I've been distant, and I've been thinking a lot about everything. About you. About what's been happening." I nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. The pain of the past few months still stung, but I wasn't going to shy away from this conversation. I had already made the decision to live for myself. Now I needed to open my heart and let her see the woman I had become. "Madison, I've been thinking about this too," I said, my voice steady but emotional. "I've spent so many years giving everything to everyone else. And somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I stopped being the woman I used to be, the woman who had dreams, passions, a life outside of being a mother and grandmother. I was so focused on you, on the family, that I forgot to live for me. And I don't want to do that anymore." Madison looked down at her hands, and I could see the guilt in her eyes. "I don't want you to think I've been ignoring you on purpose. It's just, I didn't understand. I didn't get why you suddenly changed, why you started doing things for yourself. I thought you were upset with us, that you were leaving us behind. But now I get it. I do. You've been giving so much of yourself for so long. It's like you didn't even exist anymore. And that must have been really hard." I took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. "It was hard, sweetheart. It was harder than I can put into words. But the hardest part was realizing that I had to choose myself. I had to find my voice again. I had to let go of the idea that my worth was defined by how much I gave to others." Madison's eyes filled with tears, and she looked at me with a mixture of regret and understanding. "I'm sorry, Nana. I should have seen it sooner. I should have been there for you. I should have supported you. But I didn't understand. I was so wrapped up in my own life, my own world, that I couldn't see what was happening to you. I didn't realize how much you were hurting." I reached out and took her hand in mine. "It's okay, Madison. You don't need to apologize. You were living your life, and I was too busy living for you to ask for what I needed. But I've learned that it's okay to ask for what I need. It's okay to take care of myself. And it's okay for you to do the same. She squeezed my hand, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The connection we had shared, the love that had always been there between us, was still alive. It wasn't gone, it had just been buried under years of unspoken needs, of sacrifices made without asking for anything in return. We spent the next few hours talking, really talking, for the first time in a long time. We talked about my art, about the changes I had made, about the new life I was building for myself. And slowly, the distance that had grown between us began to close. She listened to me, really listened, and I listened to her too, hearing things that I hadn't known she was going through. In that moment, I realized something profound. The distance between us hadn't been caused by my choices alone. It had been caused by years of me not being true to myself, of me not allowing anyone to truly see me. But now, as I sat there with Madison, I saw that we could rebuild. We could rebuild our relationship, one based on honesty and mutual understanding, not on expectations or silent sacrifices. As she stood to leave, she gave me a hug, her arms wrapping around me tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Nana. You're so brave. I don't know if I could ever do what you've done." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. "You can, sweetheart. You can do anything. Just remember that it's okay to put yourself first sometimes. It's okay to live for you." After she left, I sat in the quiet of my home, feeling a sense of peace that I had been missing for so long. My home was no longer just a place I had built for others. It was a place that reflected who I truly was. I had created this space, this life for me. And for the first time in years, I was truly living. With the weight of emotional healing behind me and a newfound connection with my family, I began to look at the bigger picture. Yes, my life had changed in countless ways. My relationships were evolving. My house was becoming a true home, and my artwork had breathed new life into my soul. But there was still something I hadn't fully reckoned with, my financial independence. For years, I had sacrificed not only my time and energy, but also my financial freedom. I had managed my household finances, often pinching pennies, taking on extra shifts, and putting the needs of others ahead of my own. Money, or the lack of it, had always been a point of stress for me. I had never truly controlled it. I had always been so focused on providing for my family, ensuring that they had what they needed, that I had neglected my own financial well-being. But now, in this new chapter of my life, I knew that financial independence would be just as important as emotional freedom. If I wanted to truly live for myself, I had to take control of my finances and set strong boundaries. I couldn't continue to rely on others or let money be a source of guilt or worry. I started small. The first step was to really look at my financial situation. I hadn't taken the time to properly evaluate my savings, my assets, or the debt I had carried for years. But now I needed to know. I needed to understand where I stood and where I could go from here. So, I spent a whole afternoon going through old financial statements, organizing papers, and setting up a system for tracking my income and expenses. It was tedious work, but I felt a sense of empowerment as I sifted through the details. I wasn't doing this for anyone else. I was doing it for me. As I reviewed my finances, I found that I had more than I thought I did. I had saved little by little over the years, contributing to retirement funds, paying down debts, and holding onto small investments I had made. I wasn't wealthy by any means, but I wasn't destitute either. I had enough to make choices. I had enough to live without constantly worrying about how to pay the next bill. But it wasn't just about having enough money. It was about feeling confident in my ability to manage it. And that's where my boundaries came in. For so long, I had allowed my family to rely on me financially. They knew I would give without question. They knew they could count on me. And I loved them, I really did. But I also knew that I had been sacrificing too much of myself to meet their needs. It was time to set clear boundaries. The first boundary I set was with my children. As I reflected on my financial habits over the years, I realized how much I had enabled their reliance on me. They were grown adults now, capable of supporting themselves, yet I had continued to help them out of guilt, out of love, and out of a sense of duty. I didn't mind helping them when they truly needed it, but I had started to feel used, like my resources were being taken for granted. So, I made the decision to stop. I was no longer going to offer financial support unless it was absolutely necessary. This wasn't about being harsh. It was about taking care of myself. I knew that if I wanted to build my own future, if I wanted to live my life without constantly feeling drained, I had to start putting my own needs first. I started by calling my daughter. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was one I had been avoiding for too long. Lauren, I said, after we exchanged pleasantries, I need to talk to you about something important. I've made a decision regarding finances. From now on, I'm going to focus on my own financial stability. I can't keep helping out the way I have been. I've realized that I've been sacrificing too much, and I need to take control of my future. There was silence on the other end. I could almost hear her processing my words. Mom, she said after a long pause, I didn't realize you felt that way. I thought you were always happy to help. But if this is what you need, I understand. I just don't want you to feel like you're abandoning us. I'm not abandoning you, Lauren. I'm finally living for me. And that means making choices that are good for my future. I'll always be here for you, but I need to start living for myself. And that includes being more careful with my finances. We talked a little longer, and while it was a difficult conversation, I felt a sense of relief afterward. I had set a boundary, and it felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself I had lost. But setting boundaries wasn't just about money. It was about my time, my energy, and my emotional well-being. For years, I had put everyone else's needs above my own, often to the detriment of my own health and happiness. I had been the one everyone turned to, but I had neglected my own needs. I had allowed people to take from me without considering how it affected me. So, I began setting other boundaries. I started saying no when I needed to. I stopped overcommitting myself to things I didn't want to do. I began prioritizing my health, my peace of mind, and my dreams. And with each no, I felt stronger, more confident, and more in control of my life. I took a close look at my retirement savings and investment plans. I consulted with a financial advisor to make sure I was on track for the future I wanted. I knew that taking control of my finances wasn't just about protecting myself now. It was about ensuring my future. I wasn't going to depend on anyone else to take care of me when I got older. I was going to be in charge of my own financial destiny. It wasn't easy. Old habits die hard, and the guilt that had followed me for so many years was still there, whispering in my ear, telling me that I should help, that I should give more. But each time I said no, it became easier. Each time I chose myself, it became clearer that I was making the right decision. Financial independence, I realized, was not just about having money, it was about freedom. The freedom to live my life without constantly worrying about how I was going to make ends meet. The freedom to make decisions based on what was best for me, and the freedom to set boundaries with the people I loved. I was no longer just surviving. I was living. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. The changes in my life were becoming more apparent with each passing day. My art was flourishing, my finances were becoming more organized, and the emotional weight of the past was lifting. I had taken control of the things I could, and I was no longer the woman who existed solely for others. But just when I thought I had everything under control, life reminded me that boundaries are a continuous practice. They're not something you set once and then forget. They need to be reinforced, adjusted, and respected. I had learned to say no to the small things, but now I had to learn to say no to the big things, the things that involve my family. It was one thing to set financial boundaries, but it was another to protect my emotional energy, especially when it came to those I loved most. My son, Jake, had always been the quiet one, the one who stayed out of family drama. He was a good person, but he had never fully understood the toll that my constant giving had taken on me. He loved me, I knew that. But he had grown up with the assumption that his mom would always be there for him, always ready to fix things, to help him out when he needed it. And he wasn't the only one. My daughter, Lauren, had the same expectations, even if she didn't always realize it. One afternoon, just as I was about to sit down with a cup of tea and start on a new painting, my phone rang. It was Jake. His number on the screen, immediately made my heart race. Jake never called unless something was wrong. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice hesitant. "I know you've been busy with your art and everything, but I'm in a bit of a bind. I've been trying to make ends meet, and I need help with my rent this month. I know you don't want to, but I really don't have anywhere else to turn." I felt my stomach tighten. I had been expecting this call, or something like it. He was always good about not asking for help, but when he did, it usually meant things were pretty dire. "Jake," I said gently, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know things have been tough for you, but I've set some boundaries for myself. I can't keep stepping in every time you're in a bind. I've worked hard to get to a place where I'm taking care of me, and I can't go back to being the safety net you fall on every time things get tough." There was a pause on the other end. I could hear him breathing, probably processing what I had said. "Mom, I'm not asking you to solve all my problems. I just need a little help. You've always helped me. Don't you want to be there for me?" I could feel the weight of his words, but I had made a commitment to myself. I wasn't going to fall back into the trap of thinking my worth was tied to how much I could give. I wasn't going to let myself be the emotional crutch for my adult children anymore. "I do want to help you, Jake, but helping you isn't always about money. It's about you learning to stand on your own 2 feet. I've given you everything I could over the years, but I have to let go now. You're capable of taking care of yourself, and I need you to believe that. I can't keep stepping in every time things get tough. You need to figure it out for yourself." There was silence on the other end. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I knew this was the right thing. He needed to hear it. He needed to know that I wasn't always going to rescue him. "Mom," his voice cracked, and I could feel the frustration and pain in his words. "I don't know what to do without you." I closed my eyes, taking a slow breath. "Jake, you've been able to do it before. You've gotten through hard times without me jumping in. And I believe in you, but I can't keep carrying you. I need to put my energy into building my own life now." He sighed, and I could hear the resentment in his voice, but there was something else there too, an understanding even if it was small. "I get it, Mom. I don't like it, but I get it. You've done enough." "Thank you, Jake," I said softly. "I love you, but I need to love myself first right now." We both sat in silence for a moment before he finally spoke again. "Okay, I'll figure it out. I guess I'll just have to grow up." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "You're already there. You just need to believe it." The call ended, and I sat there for a long time, feeling the sting of his words and the weight of what I had just done. But I also felt something else, relief. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. I had set a boundary and I had held firm. But setting boundaries wasn't always easy. The guilt would creep in. What if I had been too harsh? What if I had pushed him away? But deep down, I knew it was the right choice. It was time for him to stand on his own, just as I had stood on my own. Later that evening, I received a message from Lauren. She had heard about the conversation with Jake, and she was upset. "Mom, why are you doing this? We need you. You can't just turn your back on us when things get tough. We've always relied on you." I took a deep breath and replied calmly, "Lauren, I'm not turning my back on you. I'm just taking care of myself for the first time in years. I can't keep giving everything I have to you and leaving nothing for me. You're both capable of handling things on your own, and I believe in you, but I can't keep sacrificing myself." The message lingered on my screen, and I waited for her to respond. When she finally did, her words were short and sharp. "I don't understand you anymore." This isn't the mom I knew. I wasn't sure how to respond. Her words stung, but I wasn't going to let them derail me. I had made the decision to prioritize myself, and that meant accepting the discomfort that came with it. It meant letting go of the role I had played for so many years, the role of the constant giver, the fixer, the one who was always there. The conversation with Lauren wasn't easy, and it wasn't the last time she would express her frustration with me. But I knew that this was part of my growth. Setting boundaries meant that I had to accept that not everyone would be happy with my decisions, especially those who had gotten used to relying on me for everything. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to disappoint them. I wasn't afraid to say no and to let them figure things out on their own. Because I had learned that my worth was not in how much I could give or how much I could sacrifice for others. It was in how I valued myself, how I chose to live my life on my own terms. And that was the greatest gift I could give myself. The days following the conversations with Jake and Lauren were some of the hardest I had faced. The air in the house felt heavy, as if it were thick with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. My phone, once a lifeline to my children, sat silent on the counter. It wasn't that I didn't love them anymore. It was just that I had finally realized that the constant flow of demands and requests had drained me, and I couldn't continue to live that way. I had spent so many years giving everything I had, emotionally, financially, and physically, that I had neglected to give anything to myself. And now that I had finally started to put myself first, the absence of that old role, the role of the constant caregiver, was painfully obvious. But it was also necessary. The phone call with Jake had left a lingering ache in my chest. I could hear the hurt in his voice, and I understood it. I had been the one he turned to his whole life. I had always been there, without question, ready to step in when things got tough. But now, when he needed me, I had to say no. I had to let go, even though every part of me wanted to rush in and fix everything for him. But fixing his problems wasn't the answer anymore. He had to figure things out for himself. And that was a lesson I had to teach him, just as I had taught myself. The silence between us felt like a weight I wasn't sure how to carry, but I knew it was temporary. The distance would be painful, but it would also be a catalyst for change. For all of us, Lauren's reaction had been equally painful. Her message stung, but it was a message I needed to hear. She didn't understand, not yet, why I was doing this, but that didn't mean I wasn't going to stand my ground. I knew that my decision to set boundaries with my children would have consequences. I knew that they would be angry, hurt, and confused. But I also knew that I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for them, for anyone. I had spent too many years building my life around their needs. Now, it was time to build a life around mine. But as the days went on, the silence began to weigh on me in ways I hadn't expected. I missed them. I missed the closeness, the feeling of being needed. It was a loneliness I hadn't anticipated. I began to question myself. Was I being too harsh? Was I being selfish? One afternoon, I found myself sitting on the porch with a cup of tea in hand, the sun casting long shadows across the yard. The silence of the house was palpable, and it filled me with a strange sense of discomfort. I had spent so many years trying to please others, trying to be the person they needed, that being alone with my thoughts felt foreign. I looked out at the garden, at the flowers I had planted with so much care, and realized something important. The garden had bloomed because I had nurtured it, but it had also grown because I had given it space to flourish on its own, without interference, without trying to control every aspect. The same was true for me. I needed space to grow. I needed to give myself room to flourish without constantly trying to fix everyone around me. That was when it hit me. I hadn't been selfish. I hadn't been harsh. I had been necessary. Setting these boundaries wasn't about rejecting my children or turning my back on them. It was about showing them that they, too, were capable of standing on their own. It was about teaching them, through my actions, that it was okay to put yourself first sometimes. It was okay to let go of the old patterns and make space for new growth. The moment of realization brought with it a wave of peace I hadn't expected. I wasn't running from my family. I was stepping back to give them the space to learn and grow. And in doing so, I was also giving myself the space to live my life on my own terms. A few days later, Lauren called. Her voice was softer this time, not filled with anger or frustration, but with something else. Understanding. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said," she began, her tone hesitant but sincere. "I don't want to lose you. And I realize now that you're not turning your back on us. You're just taking care of yourself. I don't fully understand it yet, but I want to. I don't want to make you feel like you have to keep giving to us. I want you to be happy." I sat up straighter, the words sinking in. "Thank you, Lauren. That means more to me than you know." She paused before speaking again, her voice softer, more vulnerable. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't get it before. I've been so used to you being there for me that I didn't see what it was costing you. I want to be there for you now. I want to understand you. not just the mom I've always relied on. My heart swelled as I listened to her words. This was what I had hoped for, a recognition that I wasn't just the person who existed to meet their needs, but that I had my own needs too, and that those needs were just as important. The conversation ended on a hopeful note. We'll figure this out, Mom. I love you, and I'll support you in whatever you need. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen. The distance between us wasn't gone, but it was shrinking. The road ahead would be long, but it was one I was ready to walk. Not just as their mother, but as myself. The following weeks brought more quiet moments of reflection and growth. I spent my days painting, exploring new art forms, and letting myself be creative in ways I had never allowed myself before. I also spent time volunteering at the local community center, using my skills to help others, but this time on my own terms. I wasn't doing it for anyone's approval. I was doing it because I wanted to. I started to build a new version of myself, one who was no longer defined by the needs of others, but by my own passions, desires, and dreams. I was learning to be my own advocate, to set boundaries without guilt, and to embrace the freedom that came with living authentically. One day, as I was working in the garden, I saw Jake walking up the driveway. He looked hesitant, as if he wasn't sure how to approach me after our last conversation. But when he saw me, he walked over and stood there for a moment, just looking at me. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, he began, his voice unsure. I didn't get it at first, but I think I do now. I've been expecting too much from you. You've been there for me my whole life, and I know I need to start standing on my own 2 feet. I wiped my hands on my apron and looked up at him, nodding slowly. Jake, I'm proud of you. You're stronger than you think. I love you, but I can't always fix everything for you. I need to let you find your own way. We stood there for a moment, neither of us saying anything. And then he hugged me, just a simple hug, but one that held so much meaning. I'm sorry, Mom. Thank you for everything. I get it now. I hugged him back, feeling the strength of that moment. It wasn't about fixing anything. It was about letting go. Letting go of the past, of the old patterns, and making room for something new. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from pleasing others or fulfilling expectations, but the kind of peace that comes from knowing I had taken care of myself. It was the peace of finally understanding that sometimes the greatest act of love is not giving more of yourself, but stepping back and letting the people you love grow on their own. The days had grown longer, and with them, the quiet confidence that had settled into my life. I no longer feared the silence in the house. I had learned that it wasn't a void, it was a space for me to breathe, to grow, and to fill with new dreams. My relationships with my children were still a work in progress, but they were changing. We were learning to navigate this new version of me. The woman who had stopped being the silent giver, the one who had spent decades caring for others at the cost of her own happiness. Now I was the woman who said no when it was necessary, who claimed her own space, and who dared to live fully for herself. Jake had stopped by a few times since our last conversation. Each visit was awkward at first, but there was something unspoken between us, something new and fragile that needed time to grow. He would stop by for coffee, and we'd sit together in the living room, talking about his life, about my art, about the future. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. We didn't have to fix everything right away. We were simply learning to be there for each other in ways we hadn't before. Lauren's visits were still tense at times, but there was progress. We had stopped pretending that everything was fine, and in that honesty, we had begun to build something new. A relationship where I wasn't just the mom who gave endlessly, but the woman who had needs and dreams of her own. And for the first time in a long time, she was beginning to understand that. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. One afternoon, I sat in the studio, the light from the window casting a soft glow on the canvas in front of me. I had been working on a painting for weeks, an abstract piece that reflected the emotions I had been processing. The colors on the canvas were vibrant and bold, much like the life I was building. Every stroke felt freeing, like a part of me that had been locked away for far too long was finally being released. I stepped back and looked at the painting, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. I wasn't just creating art, I was creating my life. I was painting the life I had always wanted, the one I had been too afraid to live until now. The woman in the painting was strong, confident, and unapologetic. She was me, and for the first time I could see her clearly. I had come so far, and I wasn't finished yet. There was still so much I wanted to do, places I wanted to visit, experiences I wanted to have, and dreams I wanted to chase. I was no longer held back by guilt or fear of disappointing others. I was building a future where I came first, where my needs mattered just as much as anyone else's. As the weeks passed, I found myself reconnecting with people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old friends, acquaintances, and even former colleagues started reaching out. I had always been so focused on my family, but now that I had carved out space for myself, I was ready to let the world back in. I had the confidence to step out and be seen, not as someone's mother, wife, or caregiver, but as me, Margaret, the woman who had lived for everyone else and was finally choosing to live for herself. One evening, I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine in hand, watching the sunset as the sky turned shades of pink and orange. I thought back on the years of sacrifices, the moments when I had felt invisible, and the times when I had questioned my worth. But in that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace. I wasn't looking back anymore. I wasn't regretful for what I had done or for the choices I had made. I was proud of the woman I had become. And then I thought about the future. The life I was building now, one that was full of potential, full of possibility. I could still love my family, but I didn't have to live for them. I could still be there for them when they needed me, but I no longer had to be the one who fixed everything. I had learned to let go of the need to be needed. I had learned to let them find their own way. As I sat there, the warm breeze brushing against my face, I knew that the best was yet to come. I had taken control of my life, and now I could finally live it the way I wanted, authentically, unapologetically, and without the weight of the past holding me back. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe deeply, knowing that my journey wasn't over. It had only just begun.